minute or two. I'm trying to get us streaming on YouTube simultaneously, which is always a challenge with the technology, but we'll get started in just a minute or two. I'm trying to get us streaming on YouTube simultaneously, which is always a challenge with the technology, but we'll get started in just a minute or two. I'm trying to get. Okay, get rid of the feedback. That is working. And welcome everybody to Webinar Wednesday, where we talk about exciting and innovative topics of real estate investing, tax strategies, asset protection, business, and entrepreneurship. And today we're going to be talking about foreclosure investing opportunities, foreclosure investor. I have trouble with that. I got to change the title. Foreclosure investing opportunities. I should just say foreclosure profits. It's a lot easier. So there's going to be a lot of foreclosures coming out over the next year or two with all the COVID deferments, which are just deferments. They are not mostly forbearances. A forbearance is where a lender takes all the back payments and sticks it on the back of the loan, extends the loan term, and then you go forward making payments. Whereas a deferment is where you just don't make payments for a while. And for some people, it's been a year or more. And then at some point when this is all over, the banks will say, okay, you've got 14 payments due now, and then you have to start making your regular payments. And people are just not going to be able to do that for the most part. So they're going to end up either A, trying to convert to a forbearance, which is very difficult to get, by the way. You got to show that you're working, that you can afford and qualify as if you were getting a new loan for the existing payment. Or they're going to do a situation where they'll take the back payments and add a little chunk of that to the monthly payment going forward to pay up the deferred amounts at some reasonably small interest rate of 3 or 4%, maybe as a second mortgage on the property. You know, they're just throwing around a lot of ideas we really don't know, but what we do know is that a lot of people are permanently out of work or just temporarily working a job because they're trying to make ends meet. Their business went out of business, especially people in the restaurant business and retail, and we're going to see a lot of foreclosures. We are at the highest level of mortgage default since 2008. That's really bad. And the government can only artificially stop or delay that process for a certain amount of time before the banks are going to say, enough already, let us foreclose and let us get our properties that we collateralized back. And in that circumstance, we're going to see a rash of foreclosures. Now, what's going to happen to these people is the ones who can't qualify for some sort of workout are going to end up losing homes. And that's a bad thing for them. It ruins their credit. It makes them, in some cases, homeless and have an inability to get a new loan for many, many years because of the damage to their credit. Many of them will file bankruptcy. Not good for the homeowner. Not good for the bank, because if there's not a lot of equity in the property, especially, and they have to foreclose it and then clean it up and list it with the realtor, that is a loss of time and money for them, and they will lose money on top of it in most cases. So bad, bad. Now, the question is, where do we come in as investors? Well, as investors, we can A, stop or solve the foreclosure problem, which is a good thing for both the bank and the homeowner. In some cases, we can't help the homeowner. Some cases, we can only help the lender. But in many cases, we can help both and make a profit all together, which is a win-win-win all around, which is definitely a good thing. So let's talk about some very basic building blocks of the foreclosure process so you understand the vernacular when I talk about certain pieces of the puzzle, so you really understand how this works. And if you're going to work the foreclosure process, you really need to understand this stuff. So what is a mortgage? Most people go to the bank and they think about getting a mortgage for their property. And that's not really accurate. You go to the bank to get a loan. So you sign what's called a debt instrument in the form of a promissory note. Now, that debt instrument might be a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, or some other type of debt instrument, but usually it's a note. So the bank gives you 300 grand, you sign a note, says I owe you, and here's how I'm going to pay, and here's what happens when I don't. Now, if that's all the bank got from you, then they gave you a loan, you gave them a note, and it's uncollateralized. It's just a personal signature loan. Most banks are not going to do that. They're going to require collateral. Now, a lot of people are under the mistaken idea that you give your house as collateral for the loan. You don't. You pledge your property as collateral under what's called a security instrument. And the security instrument, in some states, it's called a mortgage. We often refer to it as a mortgage no matter what, but it's either a mortgage or it's a deed of trust. Now, a deed of trust is not a deed like a warranty deed, quitclaim deed, title, or ownership to the property. A deed of trust is a security instrument. It's a document under which you pledge your property as collateral for a note. And it says in both cases, whether it's a mortgage or a deed of trust, if you don't pay or you don't do other things that you're required to do, then the lender has the right to commence a proceeding to get the property back. Now, what's the difference between a deed of trust and a mortgage? For our discussion, not much at all, because the way it works is it's a security instrument either way. The lender has a lien against your property. The lender does not own your property. You own your property. The lender was given a mortgage or deed of trust by you. So when I said earlier, you go to the bank to get a mortgage, you actually go to the bank to get a loan, and you give a mortgage or deed of trust or security instrument as collateral. And that security instrument is recorded at the county land records and shows up as a lien against your property. So the bank doesn't own it. It's a lien that they have against your property, which is to secure performance of your obligations on the note. And the players, we have owner, borrower, mortgagor, lien holder, lender, mortgagee, depending on which document we're talking about. Under a deed of trust, it's a little different. We have what's called a grantor, who grants a deed of trust to a trustee for the benefit of a lender. And under that trust agreement, it says that the trustee will commence foreclosure proceedings once the beneficiary lender notifies them of the default. Now, it seems like they're getting a deed, but it's not really a deed. It's a security instrument. Don't confuse deed of trust or trust deed with warranty deed, the ownership of the property. Either way, it ends up at the end the same, whether it starts with a mortgage foreclosure, which is a court process, or a non-judicial trust deed foreclosure. In the end, you're at an auction. And at the auction, the lender bids, and whoever is the high bidder wins ownership of the property, which we'll get to in a little bit. So to understand and review, you own the property, you sign a note, or if it's someone else you're dealing, they signed the note. They signed a security instrument, a mortgage or deed of trust, which is a lien against the property. So the lender has a note and a security instrument, which is a lien against the property, that gives them the right to foreclose, however the foreclosure process is in that state, to get the property back. So the stages of foreclosure, let's go through those so we're all on the same page. Now, some people say this differently or have different terms for this, but I'm going to show you what my thinking is so we're on the same page. We have what's called a default. That's the first thing that happens. Now, if you really want to become an expert at this process, default on your mortgage, just stop making payments and you'll figure out exactly what the process is. Just kidding. Don't default on your mortgage. If you stop making payments, that's called a default. Okay. Now, during that default period, at some point, the lender's going to probably send you letters saying, hey, we haven't heard from you. Can we work something out, et cetera, et cetera. And then several months to sometimes years go by, depending on the lender, they will start the process of foreclosure. In a mortgage state, that's a filing of what's called a lis pendens, L-I-S, pendens. That's Latin for pending action. And what follows the pending action notice is the mortgage foreclosure lawsuit, which is like any lawsuit in court. It starts with a summons and a complaint that's served on the borrower, and they go through the foreclosure proceeding. The court appoints someone to sell the property at the courthouse steps, and then there's an auction. In a deed of trust state, it's slightly different, but usually starts with what's called a notice of default, or NOD. That's the first filing. It's usually published in a newspaper for a while, and then it goes straight to auction. In a few states, there's some court involvement. In other states, there's no court involvement. Either way, at some point, you're going to get to an auction, okay? So the pre-foreclosure period, in my mind, is any time between the filing of the first notice, either the NOD or lis pendens, and the auction date. That's pre-foreclosure. Some people think of pre-foreclosure as pre the filing, so between default and foreclosure. I call that pre-filing. In default, but no filing yet. So for our discussion, pre-foreclosure means between the notice of the first filing and the auction date. Okay? Now, during that period, whether it's default or pre-foreclosure all the way up to the auction, you have a right to cure. What is a cure? A cure means to make up the back payments, interest, penalties, attorney's fees, etc., and put the loan back in place where it was before you started the default. As opposed to a complete payoff of the loan, which of course you could do at any time up until the auction. In most states, there is a statutory right to cure, and there's a deadline for it. In some states, there is not. And there's hybrids where, well, let's say, like for my state in Colorado, you have to give a notice of an intent to cure in writing to the trustee. Then the trustee goes to the lender and says how much is owed, and then gets that number, gives it back to the borrower, and the borrower has a certain time to fork over the money. Otherwise, it goes to auction. Even after that time period is up, and let's say, that period in your state is 10 days before the auction and you're 3, can you still cure? Well, sure, you can call up the lender and say, listen, I missed the deadline, but if I wire money or overnight certified funds, will you accept a cure? And most will, up until the day before the auction. Now, there's other things that may happen. There might be court challenges. If it's a foreclosure state, the defendant, who's the homeowner, can answer and fight it. There's bankruptcy and all kinds of other things that can happen. But we're going to put those all aside now and go through the basic foreclosure process, the simple one. Now, at some point, we get to the auction. And at the auction, there's a bid. The first bidder is the lender. Now, understand, there may be more than one lien on the property, and it's important, very important, to know which lender is foreclosing. Because if it's a first and a second mortgage, and the first is foreclosing, when you bid at auction, you're getting for a free and clear property, because the foreclosure of the first will wipe out the lien for the second, and it's not vice versa. Meaning, if the second forecloses, you don't get a free and clear property at auction if you win. You get a property with a first mortgage still there. Very important to know, okay? Make sure you do a title search before you bid. So at auction, the first bid is the lender bid, and typically it's what the lender is owed. If nobody outbids the lender, then the lender is the winner and the lender gets the property. If someone bids over that, then they are the winning bidder and they get the property. Now, in most states, that's it. That's the end of the game. The high bidder gets a deed, usually from either the trustee in a trustee state or maybe a sheriff in a sheriff's auction or some other type of deed, a receiver's deed, some kind of special deed that declares them the owner of the property. Notice how it only wipes out liens behind you, not in front of you. So what's in front of the mortgage? County property taxes, sometimes HOA dues, unpaid municipal liens for water and sewer, etc. So you got to check those things outside of your title report. They're usually not big numbers, but it's important to know, what you're getting at the auction. Now, like I said, in most states, that's the end of it, and the winning bidder gets a deed, issued usually within a few weeks. Some states have a redemption period, that gives either the homeowner or someone with a lien behind the lien being foreclosed a chance to get the property. So, for example, if there's an owner's redemption, the homeowner has a certain amount of time to come in and pay up not what was owed, but what was the high bid. And in that case, the homeowner gets the property back. The person who was the high bidder gets what he bid. So it's not like, the bank was bidding 200 and the winner bid 300 and he only gets 200. No, he gets his 300. So the redemption is the all-in number. In some states as well, people who have a second mortgage have a crack at it. So the second mortgage holder can redeem for the same amount of money and they get the property. It's important to know what these things are. I'm not going to go through all 50 states. You could look it up online. But after this is all over, either there's no redemption or nobody bid beyond the lender, then the lender owns the property and it's what's called REO, which means real estate owned. It's bank owned at that point. And at that point, the lender will sometimes clean it up, sometimes not, but usually at some point list it with a real estate broker and sell it on the market as its own property, its own asset, and the foreclosure is over. Okay, now there's a couple little nuances and things you need to know about, but this is the basics. So I want to understand that we're on the same page when we're discussing the process. So how do we profit from the foreclosure process? I have 7 different specific ways that you can do it. Today, I'm going to talk about 4 that I made an acronym for because I love acronyms. They're easy to remember. It's called CASH, C-A-S-H. So C means cash purchase, A means auction purchase, S means subject to purchase, H means heavy lender discount. What does that mean? Well, I couldn't come up with an H for short sale. So heavy lender discount on what they're owed is a short sale. Okay. But I wanted you to remember cash. So I had to make it work with H. So cash purchase, auction purchase, subject to purchase, heavy levered discount. Okay. By the way, if you have questions as you go, pop them in the Q&A and I'll be happy to answer them toward the end of the webinar. Let's start with a cash purchase. So a cash purchase, you're dealing with the homeowner prior to the auction date, either after they've defaulted and or after the foreclosure has been filed in pre-foreclosure. It's usually a seller with high equity, and that's what people usually chase after. And I think they're amateurs for doing so because everybody does that. You get a list of foreclosures. It tells you, what the property is worth, or you look on Zillow and you look for the ones where it has 50% equity and you can go in and steal it from the homeowner. That's one way to do it. And then there are sellers with medium equity, and medium would be somewhere between 20 and 30% equity. That's not like 50% equity, but there's a deal to be made there. And then there's sellers with little equity, which would be 20% or less, but it's not upside down. Okay. Now, the third category is not really a good candidate, with some exceptions. If you're looking to buy a home for yourself to live in and you'd be happy with a 10% discount and it's in good shape, it's a hard neighborhood to find houses in because it's competitive and it's in good shape and you can move right in, go to the auction, or buy from the homeowner, with little equity, with 15 or 10% equity. And this type of deal is not really different than any other transaction. In a typical real estate transaction, let's say the property's worth $500,000, they owe 300, you're going to pay them, let's say 500, you're going to put 100 down and get a loan for 400. The 400 comes in to closing with your 500. The title company or person doing the closing pays off the 300, and then the seller deeds the property over to you. With a foreclosure scenario, it's the same, except the payoff of the loan is a payoff of a loan that's behind on payments. But in essence, it's the same thing as any other closing. The thing is, there are pros and cons to doing this type of deal. One, you get a good price, okay? Because they're under the gun. You get time to get a loan. So if you needed to go get either a hard money loan or even an institutional loan, if you had enough time to close, you have time to inspect the property, which is very important. And you can exit the deal if you decide it's not a good deal, because you'll sign a purchase contract with the seller with a contingency, like an inspection contingency, that allows you to exit the deal and get your money back. The cons of the cash deal. The biggest con is competition from others. Competition from others. And a lot of cons are con artists, promising them things that they'll never deliver on. So everybody has the foreclosure list once it's in foreclosure, once the notice has been filed and it's in pre-foreclosure. So you have a lot of competition for that. And most people do the same thing. They focus on the 5 or 10% of foreclosures that have high equity. It requires either hard money or cash to close the deal. Usually you're promising the seller to close quickly, or he calls you a week before the sale and you don't have time to get a regular loan, so you'll get a hard money loan. Okay, so that's the cash purchase. Second is the auction purchase. The lender bids the amount owed at the auction. The high bidder wins. So if the lender bids X and nobody else bids, the lender gets the property. There's a possible redemption, as we talked about, especially if there's an IRS lien. IRS has a federal right of redemption that's longer than the state redemptions. And a deed is issued to the high bidder. That's the way it works in an auction purchase. And again, auction wipes out junior liens. That is, liens that are recorded behind the actual lien being foreclosed. So if there's a second and a judgment, those all get wiped out at the foreclosure auction. But senior liens, ones in front of it, like property taxes, are not wiped out. The pros of doing an auction deal: you can get a good price because there's less competition, even though there are other people at the auction. There's definitely less competition than in pre-foreclosure, where there's more time. The auction is bang, bang, bang. It's done. It's over in minutes. So you have less competition than people trying to work it during pre-foreclosure. The cons: competition from other bidders, because you may not be the only one at the auction. It requires all cash. You do not have time to rent out and get a hard money loan in most states. In most states, you have to wire the money the day of the auction if you're the winner. Some states give you a week or two where you have to put 10 or 20% down at the auction by bringing with you different denominations of certified funds. So you have a 5, a 10, a 20 singles, and you combine them together to give them the 10 or 20% when you win. And then you have, in my state, it's the end of the day to wire it in. In some states, you have a week to wire it in. Okay. Not enough time to get a loan. You don't have an inspection or a contingency, and that's one of the real risks of auction purchases. If you haven't been in the home or you haven't inspected it and you don't have any contingency to get out, it can be very risky if you don't know what you're doing. So if you haven't been on the inside and people are not living there, you have to assume that it's not livable. You have to assume that it doesn't have an inside, basically, and bid accordingly. Whereas a cash purchase, you have been in the property. You know something that the people at the auction don't know. A subject to purchase, one of my favorites. You make a deal with the homeowner before the auction, either after they've gone into default or after the notice has been filed, and you make a deal where you're going to cure the back payments, and then at closing, take a deed subject to the existing loan. Then you continue making payments to the lender on his loan, and now you own the property, and you could rent it out or resell it or sell on a lease option, whatever. But you own the home. Now, there is a clause in the mortgage that says if you transfer the property like that and don't assume the loan with the lender can accelerate the loan. But why would they do that? I mean, think about that. The seller's in default. You made it current, which is good for the seller because it improves his credit. Didn't go to foreclosure. And now you continue making payments going forward. Why in the heck would the lender push the issue? And the answer is, in 99.5% of cases, they won't. The pros, it doesn't require all cash. You just need enough money to A, cure the back payments, B, maybe some fix up, C, maybe a little cash to the seller for the deal. You get time to do an inspection because, again, you're prior to the auction date, and you can have a contingency in your contract that says if you, for any reason, don't like the condition of the property or something that you misassumed, you can get out and get your earnest money back. You also get to take over possibly a low interest rate loan. Now, earlier I talked about high equity properties buying for cash. In that case, it doesn't matter what the interest rate on the loan is because you're paying it off at closing. But what about if someone who has only 10% equity, but their loan interest rate is 3%? That could be very good if you could pay some money to cure the loan, maybe even give the seller a few bucks walking money, take the property subject to the existing mortgage loan, and then rent it out for positive cash flow. It'd be a very lucrative deal. The cons, though, it could be a monster cure number, because if a bank's been sitting on either a deferment or the property was in a bankruptcy for a while, and the accruing interest. I like subject twos better if they're current or just a few payments behind, but no foreclosure has been filed yet, because it's a little easier to get into. But if you've got $25,000 or $35,000 in back payments to cure to get into this, and there's only 10% equity, it just may not be worth it. Again, they may not have a lot of equity, and equity relative to the cure number is very, very important. And the seller may want to stay in the property, which is very, very tricky. You probably don't want to do a scenario where the seller rents it back, and you definitely don't want to do a deal where they rent it back with an option to repurchase the property. We'll talk about why in a moment. And it could cause confusion if you don't paper it right or explain it right, because you're taking over their property but you're not paying off their loan, which remains in their name. And someday in the future, they may come back and say, I don't understand. I thought this was still my property, especially if you do a sale leaseback or a sale leaseback with an option to repurchase it back. Not a good idea. Now, if you're dealing in a situation where it's a cash purchase or subject to, or any deal that's prior to sale, many states have foreclosure protection acts, and those acts give very strict requirements of what must be in a contract. And the most notable is a rescission period, 3, 5, 7, 10 days, that once you sign a contract, you have to give them 3, 5, 7, 10 days to back out, which rarely do people do, by the way. But if you don't give the language in the contract and you go to closing, they have the right to cancel the deal for up to a year or two later. Oh, not good. There could be civil penalties, criminal penalties for violations. So make sure you know, if you've got a foreclosure statute in your state, that you know what it is and what the rules are. The heavy lender discount, AKA short sale. So we're looking for properties with no or negative equity, which is the majority of them. We're going to sign a contract at a price we want to pay. It's not relevant what the seller owes. What's relevant is, here's what it's worth, here's what I want to pay, and that's the purchase price on the contract. And that contract is contingent upon the lender accepting a short sale or a heavy lender discount on what they are owed. You're going to negotiate a deal with the lender on the short and then close on the deal. Okay. And in the closing of the deal, unlike in the cash sale where the entire balance is paid off, you're paying off the balance at a discount. So, for example, if the property is worth 400, they owe 450, and you want to pay 325, you're going to sign a contract for 325 that says, if the lender is willing to accept 325 instead of 450, we go forward. If they're not, we don't. Okay, so that's the contingency in the agreement. The pros: you get time to get financing in place, because these things take forever and ever and ever to get worked out with the bank. So you have time to get regular financing. You'll have an inspection right and a contingency to get out if you don't like the deal. There'll be no commitment if the lender won't play ball. If the lender says, no, we'll only take 400, we won't take 325, you're not obligated to take the deal at 400, nor would you want to. The cons: it takes a long time, months upon months upon months, to get a lender to move, because it's a long and arduous process. They're going to paperwork you to death, and hoops to jump through, and they'll say, I never got it, then you'll fax it again. They'll say, I never got it, and then you'll fax it again, and they'll say, oh, by the way, you can't fax it, you have to submit it through this computer online system, and you'll submit it, and then you got to wait. It's a long and hard process. I'm not going to lie to you. It's something that takes a little practice to get to know, and every bank has a little different process. And here's the con too: they won't let you assign or wholesale a short sale deal. So you have to go through the closing yourself and keep it as a rental, or wait. Usually it's 90 days, sometimes 6 months, before you could resell the property again. Now, the long time thing discourages a lot of investors, but my philosophy is, well, what else are you doing in the meantime? I mean, it doesn't mean you have to do nothing in the meantime. So you set up a short sale, you get it going, and work on other deals. And surprise, surprise, 6 months comes by and you got a deal worked out. So don't let what are you, not going to be an investor in 6 months? Is that the plan? Yeah, so don't worry about the long time. All right. So if you have any questions, pop them in the Q&A. Al asks, Al's always got an interesting question out of left field. What about the solar energy liens? I have no idea, Al. I really don't. It depends on what type of lien we're talking about. Are you talking about from a private company that financed solar panels? In that case, I would imagine it would be like a second lien or third lien on the property, depending on how many liens. But unless it's a government entity, then it's not going to be a super priority lien in front of the mortgages. Yeah, that was the question. Terrence asks, can you touch a foreclosure in Maryland as far as the Maryland FIFA law, PHIFFA? I assume what you're referring to is the foreclosure protection law, which was, California was the first to pass one of those. Maryland was second, and Maryland's was really bad. Yes, we have one in Colorado. It's not quite as bad as Maryland's, but yes, you can do it, but you have to jump through some hoops. It just about any, oh, this is a great question someone asked. It's allowing a repurchase bad in all states, example, Florida and Maryland and Colorado and any other state. What you never, never, never want to do is buy a property from someone, especially subject to, and then sell it back to the tenant on a lease with option. Most of the statutes, I negotiated the one and wrote it in Colorado. There are very stringent rules about how much you can mark it back up, and you have to qualify the person to make sure they can pay the lease, et cetera, et cetera. It's a bad idea. Just don't do it. Your job in those situations is to wake them up to the reality that they can't afford the house, they need to move. Now, if they just want to rent it for 6 months, because it's the end of the school year, hey, that's okay. But don't give them an option to repurchase. It's a bad idea. Edgar asks, on a subject to situation, how do I structure the deal to guarantee that I'm going to get the deed when I come up with the money to make the seller's mortgage current? It all happens at once, Edgar. You don't cure it before the closing. At closing, you will bring some cash in, which the title company will cure the loan with simultaneously with the transfer of the deed. Do not cure the loan prior to foreclosure. Do not give the seller any substantial money prior to the closing, because you can get screwed really, really badly. Now, having said that, about the no sale lease purchase back, if you buy the property from the seller cash, pay off his loan, or get a loan of your own and then sell it back to them on a lease option, better, but still I wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't do it. I've seen so many of those deals go bad because you know what always happens. The investor buys the property with the right of the former homeowner to buy it back within a certain time period, right? And they lease it in the meantime. And 3 months later, the former owner doesn't pay, the investor evicts, and then they scream bloody murder. You stole my house, blah, 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 blah. I thought he was loaning me money. I didn't understand I was giving up the house. And it's ugly. There's usually never a good outcome of that. It's rare that someone actually purchases it back. So you're setting someone up for failure, which is a bad business model. Good questions, by the way. In the meantime, while we're loading up the queue, I wanted to tell you about my Foreclosure Profits online workshop, Saturday, June 26th. My Subject to workshop was a huge hit. We had a huge crowd, and everybody loved it, except for one person, but he was an idiot. No, I'm just kidding. Can't make everybody happy. Actually, I got no refund request for that one. Everybody was thrilled. But whenever you sell something, enough of it, someone's unhappy for whatever reason. But, with that, I give a money back guarantee anyway. So you have nothing to lose. You have nothing to lose. It's Saturday, June 26th. There's the link to sign up. It's legalwiz.com/foreclosure profits. I'm going to cover the entire foreclosure process, A to Z, in much more detail. How to manage foreclosure leads, effective marketing, how to gain rapport with sellers, which is the key. People do business with you in foreclosure because they like you. And how do you beat out all your foreclosure? Well, there's some great principles that I'm going to teach you to gather that trust so they'll do business with you. The do's and don'ts of seller meetings, how to negotiate liens, all the contracts and necessary paperwork you'll need to sign one up, how to sell properties. And by the way, you're not going to get all the paperwork because it's different for every state. So I can't give you like one generic that works everywhere, but I'll explain to you what forms that you do need. How to sell properties quickly, how to do a short sale, how to negotiate with lenders, how to analyze deals, how to write up offers that get accepted, how to find buyers to resell them if that's what you do, how to build your team, how to comply with Foreclosure Protection Acts, which I will go over in detail, how to buy HUD properties and REOs. That's a whole nother category. All of the legal and ethical issues, and there are plenty involved in foreclosures, dealing with HOA and IRS liens, effective door knocking, which is really the key to getting foreclosure deals. If you've ever tried it and had a miserable failure, come to the workshop. I'll show you the right way to do it. The price, as usual, is very affordable for an all-day workshop. It's only $297. Sign up early, $197, limited to 50 people. So do not wait. It's going to be a great workshop. And by the way, you get the live workshop. If you can't make it, I'm going to record it. So whether you attend or not, you get a recording replay to watch, and you can ask questions live, or if you can't make it, you can email me questions. Let's see, we have a few chat questions here. That's a great question. Jeff asks, what's your outlook regarding the post-COVID boost in retail prices and how it will affect lenders' likelihood to agree to short sales and at what discount? Well, what COVID did is just delay business. So there's pent up buyers' demand that all of a sudden shot out in the last 6 months. It'll calm down within the next 6 months to a year. But prior to COVID, we had low inventory compared to demand, so prices were going up anyway. I think they'll continue to go up for a little while, but not at the same pace. Now, what happens when all these foreclosures go REO and the lender floods the market with inventory? Does that change the equation? The answer is it might, Jeff. It might. So lenders may be looking at that and saying, well, even though I could fix this property up and list it with a realtor and get more because the market's good, there's still, lenders have portfolios and they have default rates and they have to answer to federal regulators and investors. So if they said in their prospectus that the default rate on this pool of loans that you're lending into as an investor is 3%, and you've got an 8% default rate, you got to fix that. And that obligation is higher than the lender's greed in trying to get more back for the property than simply dump it on a short sale. Does that make sense? So that's why lenders are more likely to do short sale, because a short sale is not a foreclosure. It's not a completed foreclosure. It's a pre. Tim asks, what happens if a property is not bid on at auction prior to it being an REO? Well, there's always a bid, Tim. The first bid is the lender, and they're bid what they're owed. So if nobody else bids, the lender gets the property, which is the case probably 80% of the time, and it becomes REO. Workshop date is the 26th. Al, did I put a different date there? 26th, which is a Saturday. Let me double check my calendar there to make sure I didn't screw up my calendar there. I got the June 26th. Yeah. Saturday, June 26th. Thank you, Al. June, you almost got me paranoid there, like I wrote in the wrong date, which I've done before. June 26th. Yeah, it's an all-day Saturday. It goes from 9 to 4 Mountain. You can translate to your timeline. We're going to record the whole thing on video, so you will get a recording of it, whether you can attend it all or not. I encourage you to attend live so you can answer more questions. But either way, you know, I talk pretty fast and there's a lot of material. So it's always good to have a replay that you can watch again and again. I knew I'd get a question on this. Kevin asked, is the seminar different from your foreclosure course? And the answer, Kevin, is yes. The good news is this recording will replace the recording that's in the current course. So if you have my foreclosure course already, you don't need to sign up for the workshop. You'll get it for free, the recording. If you're thinking of buying my foreclosure course, you could buy it now, and then within a few days of the workshop, you'll have the recording. So that's an option too. Ricardo asks, how do you convince an owner to sell his property subject to? Well, the short answer, Ricardo, is you ask. It's amazing what people can do when you ask. My mother always told me, you never know what you get until you ask. I think that what happens to a lot of people, Ricardo, is they get so caught up in all the objections a seller may have that they start over-explaining things that they think will make the seller feel better that actually confuses them. And a confused mind generally says no. So at the workshop, I'll be talking about negotiating and dealing with that. I mean, look, think about it. Let's say their objection, Ricardo, is, how do I know you're going to make my payment, Bill? You go, well, Ricardo, you haven't been making your payment for the last year. What are you worried about? How could it be any worse? And it never happens. When someone's behind in payments, the objection of how do I know you'll make my payment is almost never raised, Ricardo, almost never. Now, if they're current, that's different. And they're credit conscious, it's different, because if I don't make the payment, it hurts their credit. If they're already a year behind, Ricardo, how could they possibly care? Okay. Good questions. Okay. All right. So, where were we? Yeah, go to legalwiz.com/foreclosure profits. Let me pop it into the chat window so you could just click on it. It's HTTP, makes you put the whole thing in. legalwiz.com/foreclosure profits. Let's see if I spelled that right. No, missed the C. Foreclosure profits. Well, I really misspelled that. Foreclosure profits. There we go. So take a look in your chat there. All right, we got one more question and then we'll wrap it up. Larry asks, is it ethical to pay the seller to keep the loan in their name in a subject to transaction? Why not? Why not, Larry? I mean, look, if the property's worth 400 and they owe 385 and they can't make up the back payments, they're going to walk and the bank's going to foreclose it and they're going to lose their credit for 4 years. If you give them a little cash, cure their loan, take subject to, continue making it payments on time going forward, you're improving their credit, you're avoiding a foreclosure, and you're doing them a favor. How is that unethical? Will a recording of this very webinar be available? Yes, it will be on my YouTube channel in a few days. And I want to thank everyone for that. For attending. And I hope you've enjoyed this. And I'll see you at the Foreclosure Profits Workshop. Have a great day, everybody.